Sorry. So here are on the left what the upper gallery looked like when it opened in 1926, and the lower gallery on opening day in 1926. And here, just again, to sort of remind us where we are right now, this is how the galleries look as of this summer, now that they have been deinstalled and that construction work has begun on the galleries. So, oops, let me go back. So I'm going to focus on the lower gallery space, which is dedicated to life and afterlife in ancient Egypt. And here you can see what that lower gallery space looks like. You may be able to notice the beautiful vaulting that Joe mentioned before on the ceilings there. So this is what it looks like right now, and this is what our designers, again from Haley Sharp Design, assure us that it will look something like when the project is finished and the galleries open in late 2026, fingers crossed. Now, Egyptian funerary material, including coffins, canopic jars, and human remains, mummies, has long been on display at the Penn Museum. More recently, for the past 40 years, visitors to the Penn Museum were introduced to ancient Egyptian funerary practices through the exhibit, The Egyptian Mummy, Secrets and Science, which was originally intended as a temporary display, if 40 years is temporary. This was located in a side gallery off of the main upper floor. And this exhibit was a rather text-heavy, now speaking of sort of exhibit labels and how many word counts, this had all the words. And it was a very text-heavy exhibit that explored the development of Egyptian funerary practices with a particular emphasis on the science of mummification. This exhibition was complemented by another small adjacent gallery space that featured several cases with recreations of ancient Egyptian burial chambers that were designed in the early 1970s, I think, including this colorful case that contained several mummies and coffins, and occasionally our exhibits department would sort of shift the mummies around and shift the coffins around, but it essentially remained the same for many, many years. This case seems to have been designed by David O'Connor and Lanny Bell. At least we have photographs in our archives that seem to show them in there working on this case. Additional funerary material, such as stone sarcophagi and statuary, were again displayed out of context in the main sculpture gallery on the upper floor. As far as daily life goes, a paltry assemblage of artifacts of daily life were presented in another small side gallery within several exhibit cases with little or no didactic information, and often there were no working lights in those cases. When the two models in this case that you're looking at here had to be taken off display for conservation, a smaller version of that colorful tomb recreation was reinstalled here due to the popularity of Egyptian mummies with our school group tours. And this case remained on display until the fall of 2023, when this gallery, and in fact all of the upper floor, closed for good. Now, the new reinstallation plans, as we've mentioned, dedicates the entire lower floor, or the main floor of the Cox Wing, to life and afterlife in ancient Egypt. This space features a large central hall and 3 smaller side galleries. Here you can see a view of what that main hall looked like when it first opened in 1926, with those elements of the Merneptah Palace there, and the column from the Temple of Harishef, also shown there. And here are some views of those side gallery spaces when they opened in the 1920s. This space that you see here will house our Ptolemaic and Roman funerary material. And the one that you're looking at here will house our early dynastic through Old Kingdom funerary material. And here is a view of what that particular space that's going to show the house, the Old Kingdom, the early funerary material, looks like right now. And note there's that bricked up area in the corner here. Oops. That is where there was a freight elevator here that's been removed, and we have a new freight elevator that Joe made mention of that is being put in a new location. When we began planning for the new galleries, particularly the lower galleries here, we were faced with one very large obstacle that sat in the center of the room, and that is the 13-ton red granite Sphinx of Ramses II. The Sphinx was originally moved into position in this room when the wing was completed in 1926, and the wall through which it was brought into that room was bricked up behind it after it was brought in. And Joe and I wrote a book about the Sphinx that came out in 2015, and in this book we wrote that it would be basically impossible to get the Sphinx out of this space again. We were liars. We were wrong. Don't believe everything you read. It's not always true. In the summer of 2019, the Sphinx was actually moved out of this gallery space, not through the bricked up wall that it came in through, but rather out a window into an inner courtyard of the museum, where over the course of a couple of very nerve-wracking days, it was moved via air dollies up a ramp and into another window, into a newly prepared space that is adjacent to, or right in front of, the main entrance into our building that Joe mentioned before. And now the Sphinx greets every visitor to the Penn Museum here. Now with the Sphinx out of the way, literally and actually, we can return to the layout of the lower gallery dedicated to life and death in ancient Egypt. Visitors are going to begin their journey with this atmospheric Nile River experience. There's going to be a looping sort of film projection up in this area here of the Nile River. And then below, there's sort of a walk-by timeline of ancient Egyptian history with highlight objects from each of the important historic periods. And then here is that map and then the sort of AV kiosk here that I mentioned before that will highlight Penn Museum's work in Egypt over the last 100 years. And maybe here is where information about how the galleries used to look could also be included. Now, daily life is going to be looked at and explored in this side gallery here, highlighted in yellow. This space used to be our Islamic gallery, and it currently looks like this. There were two large medieval mosaic fountains that were actually embedded into the floor that have been removed. And so you can see that square, that yellow square shows where one of them was taken out. The Daily Life Gallery will cover topics such as personal piety, craft production, professions, home life, and of course, writing and the scribal tradition. Some of our papyri and manuscripts will be on display here, but they will be on display on rotation due to concerns our conservators have about damage from light levels. And in fact, they won't be on display in cases sort of on the wall, but rather there are these sort of pull-out drawers located here where they will be, visitors will be able to sort of pull the drawer out and view some of the manuscripts. The rest of the lower floor will focus on ancient Egyptian preparations for the afterlife, which for most of the gallery will be presented chronologically to highlight changes in burial practices. But first, visitors are going to be introduced to the basics of ancient Egyptian funerary religion. And so we have a case here introducing some of the important funerary deities. Then there is a case here, not reconstructing sort of an ancient Egyptian burial chamber, but a case that sort of introduces what some of the necessities of a good burial are. So the objects in this case come from a wide variety of time periods, but visitors are introduced to, what is a canopic jar, what is a coffin, what is a mask, and as they go through the rest of the exhibits and they encounter these things, they will have been told in this first case sort of what it is, what its function is, and sort of how important it was to the ancient Egyptians. As you come into the main part of the gallery, you'll see a highlight of the Penn Museum's collection. That is the Old Kingdom Tomb Chapel of the 6th Dynasty Treasury official Khafre. This chapel comes from Saqqara and was part of the 1904 World's Fair in St. Louis. It features a monolithic several-ton false door. This chapel used to be on display in the lower gallery at the Penn Museum. People used to be able to walk into it, but it was closed to visitors prior to the 1990s. And then it was dismantled, and half of the chapel was sent around the US as part of a loan, a traveling exhibit. In the new gallery space, the chapel and its doorway will be widened slightly to allow greater accessibility, but while still maintaining this ancient architectural space. So visitors will be able to go in and get a sense of what it's like to be inside an ancient Egyptian tomb chapel. Because of the monumental scale of the false door, which you see here, the casework for this structure and its structural support are quite complicated, but we hope to highlight with this exhibit the beautifully preserved and carved and painted interior decoration of this tomb chapel. Throughout the rest of the lower gallery displays, emphasis is placed on displaying funerary artifacts in context. As mentioned, the displays are arranged chronologically from the pre-dynastic period through to the Greco-Roman period. And here is just a view of one of the sort of early displays, a view of the recreated burial of the 1st Dynasty tomb M1 from Abydos, excavated by Petrie. Jumping forward a bit in time, another notable set of artifacts we have in the collection is the inner and outer cedar coffins of the nomarch Ahanakht from Bersha. The inner coffin on the left was on display for many years in one of the recreated burial chambers adjacent to our Secrets in Science gallery. The outer coffin on the other side, you can see here put together in this historic photo, had been dismantled and was into its individual boards, and it was in storage for many years. It will now be reconstructed, put back together, and a digital label will allow visitors to kind of explore the interior of this massive outer coffin, which is completely incised with coffin text spells inside, as you can see from this image of one of the two of the end boards. Jumping forward again a bit in time to the New Kingdom, you can see the design for the case for the coffin and tomb goods from the tomb of Gemesh from Meidum, excavated by Alan Rowe in 1931. This brightly painted coffin has been on display at the museum since the 1930s, as you can see from its original display. Here it is in one of those recreated burial chamber exhibits done in the 70s. With all of this material, again, we try to incorporate the archival information we have, field records whenever possible, and a number of the exhibits are accompanied by digital label kiosks, which will allow visitors to explore the objects in greater detail because of this limited number of words that are allowed on the standard tombstone labels. And I don't know if you can read their maximum number of words is something like 75 words, which isn't a whole lot of words. The remains of 8 individuals will also be exhibited with their associated coffins and tomb goods. These mummies will be displayed in accordance with the Penn Museum's recently completed human remains policy, which states that, quote, no exposed human remains will be considered for display. Now, only human remains which are fully wrapped or covered are allowed to be placed on view, and visitors will be advised of their presence in the gallery spaces before they enter in the event that they wish to avoid encountering human remains. Each exhibit case with human remains will also be marked with a visible icon to further alert visitors to the presence of such remains. This policy has also caused us to reconsider the way in which we are displaying a number of our mummified individuals, in particular, the anonymous mummified man known as Pum II. Pum II was autopsied in the 1970s, and as a result of this scientific investigation, he was completely unwrapped. And his exposed remains were on display in the Secrets in Science Gallery for about 40 years. We have decided to rewrap him, and our conservators are working together with an Egyptian conservation specialist from the GEM, Mr. Ahmed Tarek, to determine the best way to carry out this process so that he can be returned to his coffin and have his mask and his cartonnage trappings placed back on him. And he will then be displayed in a way that will adhere to the Penn Museum policy. And he is the figure in the center there, and there are two other mummified individuals in their coffins on either side of him. I hope this overview of our gallery project has given you some ideas about what we hope to achieve and the tremendous amount of work it's taken to transform our 100-year-old gallery spaces into modern exhibition spaces fit for the future. I don't know if I have the time, but there's a very short little video.
You have 15 minutes.
Oh, I have 15 minutes. I guess
Yeah.
I ran through. Well, I'll show the video. There's a little video here that gives a fly-through of the lower gallery, showing the daily life room and areas dedicated to the funerary arts. So fingers crossed this will work. We can kind of talk you through it. Is it going to work? It's not going to work. Oh, maybe it will. Oh, here we go. Okay, so we are entering from the hinge. We're entering from the hinge, and here you, the gateway to Egypt. And here you can see the tomb chapel there on the left. We're now walking into the daily life room with its displays on the Egyptian house and various occupations and the scribal tradition. And then coming back out into the main gallery space, here's where visitors are introduced to sort of the basics of ancient Egyptian funerary religion and the necessities for a good burial. And then you come into the main space, and here we are entering into the tomb chapel of Khafra with its slightly widened space. And now entering one of the side galleries with the pre-dynastic through Old Kingdom funerary material. Now coming back out into the main hall. Again, the displays are chronological in their organization. And again, we tried to group material into tomb groups, try to give context with some of the material as much as possible. We have some of the mummified individuals there on display. And then finally you enter into the sort of Greco-Roman or late period through Roman period side gallery, which sort of finishes up the funerary material. And so that kind of gives you a sort of a quick run through of what the spaces look like. This little video was done maybe about a year ago, so things have changed slightly. There used to be an element in the center of the galleries that we sort of referred to as the mummification station, and the plan was originally to have a mummy in the center of the room, and then sort of audiovisual where people could explore sort of digitally unwrap the mummy with CT scans and things like this. As part of the human remains policy, it was sort of, that idea was taken off the table. And so the mummification station has been altered. And now it is an exploration of mummification and sort of the tools and equipment of mummification, but there will no longer be a mummy in the center of the room. There was also in that mummification station another sort of multimedia area that we called Ancient Egypt's Legacy, where we wanted to address sort of ancient Egypt in the world today, and things like Egyptomania or ancient Egypt in architecture, in movies, in pop culture. That has also been sort of scrapped and folded into more of a digital kiosk that's kind of off to the side. So some things that you see in the video here are slightly altered from what they will eventually look like in the reinstallation. Thank you.
Can I start off with one comment question?
Sure.
Amazing, absolutely amazing. I'm noticing a lot of really large graphics. Above cases, all over, but I mean, with some of these fly-throughs, what you're seeing are graphics.
Yeah,
Is that still what you're going to be? Are you happy with that balance? Is that, you think, what's going to actually happen?
I think that in the fly-through, the graphics really do pop out in a way that they won't in the actual reinstallation. I think what the designers tried to do, both downstairs and upstairs, they were working with this vocabulary of an upper-level graphic, something very large. And upstairs, I think it tended to be more subtle in its coloring, at least in the main gallery space. I think in the Nubia 2 galleries, it's a brighter image. And then, so that's sort of at the top level imagery. And then in the cases, case backs, there's also sort of large images as well. But I think, a lot of these renderings don't give you the exact way it's going to look. But yes, there are a lot of sort of bold images that are used.
I just asked because working with these big companies like Haley Sharp, it's like they're designers and they want to design. Mm-hmm. They really want to put a lot of design in these galleries. Mm-hmm. So it's interesting. We can talk about more about how you interface with them and how you reach a happy medium with them wanting to put a lot of graphics in where you're perhaps more interested in objects.
Yeah, they also did our Middle East galleries. And so we were familiar with their work and how the Middle East galleries looked. And the Middle East galleries, I mean, they're lovely, they look very nice, but we knew, the Egyptian section knew we didn't want our galleries to look like the Middle East galleries. So there was, I think at the beginning, a little bit of, let's not replicate exactly what we have going on, in those galleries. And I think, because it's the same design firm, they may have wanted to kind of repeat similar things.
Well, it's lucky for you that you were able to see their work in your own institution in a different project. Questions?
I think in our original discussion with this particular firm, Haley Sharp, the Middle East galleries had a very subtle color palette. I mean, it's sort of beige throughout, and the objects do pop out beautifully, but we definitely wanted to bring more color into our displays. I mean, when you see those upper level graphics, especially in the fly-through, a number of those are kind of placeholders that they popped in to give you a sense of, a graphic at that level. For the upper level graphics, we also, there is an issue with echoes in some of these rooms, so it also has a sound proofing effect. I think it's especially necessary in the upper halls where the ceilings are quite high. The Nubia galleries have upper level graphics throughout, but yeah, they won't be quite so colorful, shall we say, striking as they appear in some of those reconstructions.
The microphone's coming. Why don't you wait for just a moment?
Thank you very much. Why did you decide to wrap again the mummy and not simply to close the coffin?
That's a good question. We decided not to close the coffin, partially because he does. So Pum 2 was autopsied and not just unwrapped in the 1970s. He was also autopsied. So his remains are in a state that are, I think not very good. And he also has all of his trappings, his mask, his cartonnage. And we felt that by rewrapping him in some way, I mean, it won't be a complete rewrapping. It's going to be more of a shrouding, but more than just draping linen over him. I mean, there'll be some form to him that this would afford him some sort of modesty and respect and dignity that the autopsy and the unwrapping and the exposure had been done to him, So that is one of the reasons why we wanted to do this. We could have put his remains back in his coffin and closed the lid, and that would be it. It would have protected them. But we felt that this was, an option to explore. The whole discussion about the display of human remains at the Penn Museum is one that was fraught with a bit of controversy, and many of you in this room wrote letters in support of mummies being on display and continuing to be on display at the Penn Museum, for which we thank you. So it was also a way to keep another mummy on display by rewrapping him to comply with the Penn Museum's policy, rather than just putting him back in the coffin and closing the lid. So there are sort of a number of reasons why we did it.
Would it be possible to put up that image again so we can have a link to the PDF
Oh, sure.
of the policy? Yeah.
Probably easier said than done. How do I go?
Here.
Oh.
Oh, good. Okay.
Is that available on the website?
It's available on the Penn Museum website. So if you just Googled Penn Museum Human Remains Policy, it will pop up. And the policy discusses, how the museum approaches the human remains in display, teaching, stewardship, and what is the fourth one I'm forgetting? And well, in sort of all ways and research. So if scientific testing and things like that. So yeah, so the exhibition, the display of human remains, is just one small part of the policy.
Yes, thank you. I just want to tell you that your idea to envelop him again is also a part of conservation, the mummy. It's a reason to pay conservators to do their very best to conserve it. And also it is, I think, of course, it is better than separate, because according to the meaning of the ancient Egyptians, he is brought back to his destiny for eternity. So I think we can accept that. I personally can accept that better than separate the human remains in the magazines.
Well, if there are no further comments or questions, I think it's time for the afternoon coffee break.